On the last episode of the Keepsake box. Phase 3. I refilled David's glass and recapitulated the plan in my mind. I joined David on the couch and struck up a conversation with him. I said, "Sweetheart, today is our anniversary, and I've really been putting some things into perspective. This has always been a special day for us, a day of beginnings. This marks the anniversary of our first one-on-one date. On this day, you proposed to me at that beautiful restaurant in Belize. This is the day that we vowed to be husband and wife forever. What better day to put our lives back together? What do you think about getting our marriage back on track? We can hire another Juanita and go back to the way things used to be. Maybe we can start the process of getting guardianship of Cassidy. I promise you that I have learned all the lessons that you've been trying to teach me. We can make this easy. Let's just start over." David laughed and started a conversation of his own. He said, "Shelley, are you kidding me? Let me explain something to you. I wouldn't change this situation if my life depended on it. Even with the work that I've put into you, you haven't ever measured up, and you certainly don't now. Do you know why I picked you, Shelley? Let me answer that for you. It's because you had the perfect balance of intelligence and stupidity. Yes, you were intellectually advanced, but you were stupid in every aspect that mattered to me. I knew that to be the case based on my interactions with Antonio. I wasn't just Antonio's attorney. I was his confidant as well. He told me a lot about you. As far as I'm concerned, what he perceived as loyalty was equated to stupidity in my book. I watched him hand over a slew of struggling businesses, and I saw that they were bigger and better when you returned them. You were intelligent enough to grow Antonio's businesses, but not smart enough to avoid losing them upon his release. He was able to convince you to be a drug dealer. That told me a lot about you. I knew that I could mold you into whatever I wanted you to be, and you didn't disappoint. Everything that happened gave me a glimpse into who you were. After all, you allowed yourself to be belittled by my acquaintances for my benefit. That says a lot. Have you ever wondered why I didn't have to ask you for your address when I requested our first one-on-one date? That's because I was already aware of where you lived. I had been following you since Antonio's death. I contacted you in reference to getting what Antonio left for you, knowing that it would create an avenue for us to be exposed to each other. I followed you to the coffee shop after you left my office that day. You were so easy to read. I knew what I needed to give you in order for you to be everything that I wanted you to be. It would just require a little work and tolerance on my behalf. You were chubby and unrefined. You embarrassed me time and time again by showing up with your gaudy clothes and jewelry. But I saw the bigger picture, so I pretended not to care. I knew that I could change you. Do you remember when you awakened at my house after meeting me at the bar for the first time? There's a very good reason for why you awakened feeling so horribly the next morning. You really did only have one margarita. I guess it didn't pair well with the drugs that I put in it. But you were stupid enough to believe that you'd had too much to drink on your own accord. That told me a lot about you as well. I knew that I could manipulate your mind. I took advantage of the opportunity to make copies of your keys while you were incapacitated. Somehow, I felt that they would come in handy. And what do you know? I found out that you still had that house in the country, and you were stupid enough to move Juanita there. I let you live in peace while I prepared and forged the documents that placed me in the position to steal your entire estate. When everything was in order, I went over to the house and let myself in. You weren't even smart enough to change the locks. I choked the life out of Juanita with my bare hands and disposed of her like the animal that she was. Afterwards, I returned and burned down your grandmother's house. I enjoyed every moment of that day, especially when I came home and informed you that your life would change forever. I often relive the moment when I watched the life fade out of Juanita's eyes. I think about that when I rape you. It makes it easier for me to touch you. I made you into what I wanted you to be and broke you down when I was ready. Why would I want to work anything out with you? You're weak and stupid. Besides, I'm fine with the way things are. I'd rather enjoy it. And just so we don't ever have to have this conversation again, it wasn't ever my plan to help you get guardianship of Cassidy. I used her as leverage this entire time. You were just too stupid to realize that. I can barely tolerate you. What makes you think that I would bring in someone who functions at a lower mental level than you? You have to be kidding me. David walked away shaking his head as if my request was at the utmost level of absurdity. But that was fine. I had no desire to work things out with him, but I knew the suggestion would be the trigger. I knew he would say something that would help me to remember why I hated him. As usual, David succeeded. He made it easier for me. Meanwhile, he never doubted that he was winning. I knew that David was going into his bathroom to retrieve his P4 box, as that had become his nightly routine. I sat on the couch and awaited the moment when I could complete Phase 3. Chapter 20, Phase 4, Time's Up. Narrated by Shandora Warren. I waited 30 minutes before kicking my plan into high gear. I picked up my phone and opened the security camera app. I paused all of the cameras in the house and placed my phone on the couch. I called out to him. David, can you hear me? I walked down the hallway and into our empty bedroom. I entered to find that David was in his bathroom. I knocked, but there was no answer. I slowly opened the door and discovered that David was passed out, just as I knew he'd be. He was sitting on the floor with his back propped against the wall. His head was slightly tilted to the left. I lightly tapped David's leg with my foot. He didn't move. I retrieved a pair of gloves from the pocket of my apron and carefully put them on. I removed a folded piece of paper and a straw from David's lap. I put them both in a sandwich bag, also retrieved from my apron. I put the sandwich bag into my right pocket. I reached into my left pocket. For a short moment, my mind told me to stop. But I thought about the conversation I had just had with David. I envisioned him choking Juanita and burning Grandma's house down. I thought about all of the abuse and all of the corners that he had backed me into. I thought about the fact that he had held the guardianship of Cassidy over my head, knowing that it wasn't ever his intent to help me gain custody of her. I knew I had to follow through with the plan. I owed it to myself, to Grandma, to Juanita, and to Cassidy. I retrieved one of David's ties from my pocket and wrapped it around his right arm. David was left-handed. It had to look credible. I retrieved a needle that contained the drugs that were given to me by Cream. I touched it with David's fingers, ensuring that his prints would be found on it. I took a deep breath and put the needle into David's vein. I injected the entire contents and left the needle in his arm. David's eyes rolled into the back of his head. He started to have a seizure. I watched as he vomited and choked on the contents of the last meal that he'd ever demanded of me. Baked chicken, mashed potatoes, and asparagus. I watched until he stopped moving. I took in the entire scene and committed it to memory. I needed to remember that feeling. I needed to remember where I had gone because of my inability to see the signs and put myself first. I knelt down beside him and checked his pulse. There wasn't one. How ironic. On the night that David proposed to me, he made me promise that I would be by his side until the day he died. I can't imagine he ever thought that it would happen in that way. But I was by David's side until the day that he died, just as I promised. I went back into the living room and picked up my phone. I disabled the camera in David's bathroom and erased its entire memory. Afterwards, I returned to my original position on the couch and turned all of the other cameras back on. I walked down the hall into David's bedroom. I called out to him. David, can you hear me? David. He didn't answer, of course. I walked into the bathroom and found David. I pulled him down by his legs. His urine and feces pooled together in a large puddle beneath him. I climbed on top of David's body and performed CPR, knowing that he wouldn't respond. I hugged him, assuring that his bodily fluids made contact with my clothing. I stood and prepared for the performance of a lifetime. In my haste, I left my cell phone in the bathroom, but that wasn't at the forefront of my mind. It was time for Phase 4. Phase 4. I ran outside, screaming to the tops of my lungs. One by one, our neighbors came onto their porches. I screamed, "Please, somebody help me." I fell onto my knees. I channeled all of the hurt in my life, which allowed the tears to freely form. I wasn't sad about David's death, not in the least. I was, however, sad about being raped by Ron. I was sad about being subjected to Ken's violence. I was sad about not knowing what happened to him. I was sad about Grandma's passing and the loss of her house. I was sad about Peaches getting killed. I was sad about how things happened with Cassidy. I was sad about Cream being indigent and on drugs. I was sad about the deaths of Sharon and Antonio. I was sad about Juanita. I was sad that I had lost myself over and over again. I was incredibly sad. I completely allowed myself to feel each and every one of those things collectively for the first time in my life. I waddled on the ground, screaming and crying. I was covered in David's vomit and excrement, which caused dirt and debris to stick to my clothing. In that moment, I was mourning everything that I had lost, and I just let it all go. When I was able to speak, I screamed out, "He's dead! David is dead!" A couple of our neighbors went inside of our house, while the rest stayed outside to comfort me. At some point, someone called the police. Undoubtedly, it was too late for David. He was no longer. In what seemed like a matter of minutes, the house was swarmed with emergency personnel. I stayed outside while they did their business, refusing to enter the houses of any of the neighbors that offered refuge. I needed to be there. I needed to see it. They brought David out in a body bag. I fell apart when they put him into the ambulance, a well-rehearsed part of Phase 4. A policeman approached me. "Can you come into the house?" he asked. I was nervous. What if things hadn't gone according to plans? What if they suspected me? What if I was about to be arrested for David's murder? But that was not to be the case. No one suspected me. The officer offered his condolences and asked if there was anyone that I needed to call. There wasn't. I had no one. He handed my phone over, which had been left in the bathroom. It still had traces of David's vomit on it. The officer asked if I had somewhere that I could stay. I told him that I would get a hotel room for the night and that I would be okay. Everyone left and I was alone. For the first time ever, I was perfectly happy about being alone. I was also happy that David's time was finally up. I went into my phone and permanently disabled all of the cameras. As far as the world was concerned, they never existed. I went into the banking app and permanently turned my card back on. David wouldn't ever restrict access to my funds again, and I felt good about that. After ensuring that I had completed all of my Phase 4 phone tasks, I turned off my phone. I went into the trunk of my car and brought my Keepsake box into the house. I opened it and deposited the drugs that I found on David's lap. I put my cell phone into a sandwich bag and placed it inside as well. I'd replace it the next day. I had no desire to talk to anyone that night. I got a room at the most expensive hotel in town, where I ordered room service and got a massage. On David, of course. I certainly needed both after the day I'd had. I bought a new phone the next day, and I was sorry to have done so. David's circles were relentless in their pursuit for information. I was very much aware that it wasn't out of genuine concern. Everyone wanted to be a part of the action. That annoyed me, but it was to be expected. That's how our circles operated. Social media was full of people providing their personal accounts of the last time they encountered David. There were screenshots posted of conversations that occurred years earlier. Some were as generic as, "See you Saturday." It was all so pretentious and contrived, but I didn't care. I didn't pretend to. I tapped into all of David's social media accounts. Yes, I did. David was such a private person. I imagined his posthumous anger of me having the ability to view his personal information. That would really have infuriated him, and I felt good about that. I found out all kinds of things. When I tell you that David was busy, David was busy. According to his text messages and social media accounts, he was involved with at least 5 other women at the time of his death. Each woman was convinced that they were in line to take my place. They had no idea that David wouldn't ever have allowed them to become the new me. He had no desire to let his marriage fail in front of the world. Unfortunately, they all suffered the hurt of feeling that they had lost the love of their lives. I never told them any different. I participated in a press conference where I tearfully advised against the dangers of doing drugs. I proclaimed that David was the love of my life and that he would be missed. I claimed that I would continue to share David's story. If I can save just one. That was my go-to line. That's what I wanted everyone to take away, but it was bigger than that. David was so image conscious. We all were. If David could have had it his way, he would rather have had people think that he passed away from some mystery illness. He wouldn't ever have wanted people to know that he died as a result of a drug overdose. That being so, I made sure to tell anyone who would listen, and everyone listened. I felt good about that. And then it was time for David's funeral. I have to admit, I really put on a show. I allowed the casket to remain open for the entire service. I spoke about how life wouldn't ever be the same for me, and tearfully recounted the good times that I shared with David. I vowed to keep his memory alive, via the numerous foundations that I created, of course. I stepped down from the podium and stood in front of David's open casket. I kissed his forehead and placed a single flower inside before closing the casket. It was a purple orchid, the same type that David had given to me on each of our anniversaries. I retired that flower on that day. It was no longer my favorite. After the service, everyone spoke about how brave I was. Apparently, the vast majority of the population would have lost their minds if they had found the lifeless body of their significant other. They were amazed at my ability to keep it together. I told them that I wasn't brave. I told them that I had to hold it together because that's what David would have wanted me to do. I told them that David wouldn't ever have wanted me to fall apart, fully aware that he made it his life's mission to watch me fall apart during most of our marriage. They wouldn't ever have known that. I allowed Chad and Sean to accompany me in the limo as we were chauffeured to David's final resting place. I invited Mandy and Tina as well, knowing that David would be bothered that I meddled in our friends' affairs by placing Sean and Tina there together. It really was quite sad. I watched as Chad and Sean sat solemnly, attempting to hold it together. I watched as Mandy and Tina conversed about the advancements in Tina's life. Apparently, she did quite well after leaving Sean. She had gone back to school and had started her own interior design company. Mandy and I congratulated her on a job well done. I could tell that Sean was furious, but he dared not say so. He wouldn't ever have given Tina the pleasure of knowing that she had affected him, but I saw it, and that was enough for me. We arrived at the burial site. Mandy pulled me aside and told me that she would be leaving Chad in the coming days. She looked into my eyes and simply said, "Good job. You've always said that everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone deserves to be free." I knew in that moment that Mandy had figured it all out. I'd underestimated her ability to be observant. I told Mandy that I would provide her with the resources to live well upon her departure from Chad. She smiled and said, "I know you will. You're a great friend." It was opportunistic on her part, but what can I say? The men in our lives had taught us well. I made my way to the burial site with the legal group by my side. I thanked everyone for coming and told them how much David and I appreciated them being a part of our lives. I blasted "Where Do Broken Hearts Go" as they lowered David's body into the ground. When asked about the song choice, I proclaimed that it was our song and that David would have wanted me to play it. My heart smiled, knowing that David hated that song. He wouldn't have wanted it to be attached to him in any way. I was happy that he wasn't there to tell me to turn it off. His last moments above ground would always be synonymous with that song, and I was extremely happy about that. No one ever questioned it. All things considered, I learned a lot from David. The biggest things were to look the part and to always be several steps ahead. Before I assisted David in his demise, I became as good of a forger as he was. I made sure that I was the sole beneficiary of his estate. I would receive all of his assets, including those that he had stolen from me. Additionally, I was the sole beneficiary of all of his insurance policies and the businesses that his father had left to him. With very little effort, I was a millionaire many times over. It was just too easy. While going through David's things, I uncovered that he had found Cassidy years earlier. Apparently, Mom hadn't ever placed her into a home. She had, however, gotten incarcerated as a result of a drug-related offense. With no relatives on file for Cassidy, she had been adopted by Ron's sister, Sharon's mother. With both Mom and Ron incarcerated, Sharon's mother had moved into the family house and taken over Cassidy's care. There was no way that I was going to allow that to stand. Sharon's mother had taken money in exchange for the silence of her daughter. Additionally, she forced Sharon to maintain contact with Ron to avoid embarrassment to their family. There was no way that I was going to leave Cassidy with her. Everything was set up for me. All I had to do was live my best life, and I was determined to take Cassidy with me. I contacted Sharon's mother, and she was more than willing to hand Cassidy over. For a fee, of course, but that didn't matter. I paid her and brought Cassidy to live with me, an arrangement that she and I were both thrilled with. I had finally fulfilled my obligation. I thought about what was important and the promises that I had made, stated and otherwise. I met with Cream and gave her the money that was promised to her. I also arranged for her to go to an amazing rehabilitation center. She didn't go. While living in David's house, I rebuilt a house on Grandma's land. It was larger and grander, but Grandma would have loved it. When it was complete, I gave David's house to Cream and moved out. I had no need for it, nor did I have any emotional attachment to it. I signed it over to her, and I never felt that I had lost a thing. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shinny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to purchase books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon in ebook, paperback, and some in hardback formats. Thank you for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Shine, little girl.